the summer of 2024, pressed down on Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a heat so heavy it seemed to cling to the windows of the old Victorian house on Maple Street. Sarah Mitchell, 38 years old, and still raw with grief, climbed the groaning staircase to the attic, believing it would be her final trip into that space of dust and memory. For 3 long weeks, she had sorted through her late grandmother's belongings, a task that felt both endless and intimate. Every box she opened carried the weight of history, Christmas ornaments dulled by age, photographs faded by time, and clothes that smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. Her grandmother, Eleanor Wells, had passed just a month earlier at 91, leaving Sarah not just with a house too empty, but with the silence of losing the woman who had been her anchor, her surrogate mother, and her closest confidant. The attic was suffocating, the air thick with the musty scent of wood that had seen more than a century of summers. Dust motes drifted like tiny ghosts in the slanting afternoon light, and as Sarah pushed aside a heavy wooden trunk, her hand paused. The floor beneath it looked uneven, a section of boards slightly raised as though warped by time. Kneeling, she brushed her fingers over the edges and felt her pulse quicken. The boards weren't warped at all, but loose, fitted together, with deliberate care to hide something beneath. With cautious determination, she pried them open and uncovered a hidden cavity no larger than a shoebox. Inside rested a small steel lockbox, its one-screen paint chipped away and dulled by decades of dust. Surprised by its weight, she carried it downstairs into the kitchen, the heart of the home, where her grandmother had once comforted her through heartbreaks and celebrated her triumphs. The lock, aged and brittle, gave way under the pressure of a screwdriver from the old tool drawer, and with a metallic snap, Sarah's world shifted. The first thing she saw was a manila envelope, its paper yellowed but her name written boldly across it in her grandmother's unmistakable script. Beneath it lay newspaper clippings, photographs, and what appeared to be official documents. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter, the words pulling her into a reality she had never imagined. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time has come for you to know the truth about what happened to your family in 1992. I have carried this burden for 32 years, and I pray that you can forgive an old woman for keeping such a terrible secret." Sarah's breath caught. The family she had lost as a little girl, the parents and sister who had vanished on a trip from Minnesota to Colorado when she was only 6, had always been spoken of as a tragic mystery, an accident swallowed by time. Yet here, in her hands, was proof that the story was far from what she had been told. Something darker, deeper, and long concealed was waiting to be revealed. Their car had been discovered abandoned at a lonely rest stop along Interstate 80 in Nebraska, its doors locked, its interior undisturbed, and not a single trace of struggle to explain why an entire family had vanished. For Sarah, who had been only 6 years old at the time, the disappearance left her with little more than fragments of memory, the warmth of her mother's laughter, the solid comfort of her father's shoulders, the gentle sound of Emma's voice reading bedtime stories. Her grandmother had done everything possible to preserve those memories while building a new life for her. Yet beneath every holiday and every milestone there had always been a shadow, an unspoken truth Sarah sensed, but never fully understood. Now, with the lockbox open before her and decades of secrets spilling across the kitchen table, that shadow was taking shape. The newspaper clippings Eleanor had collected weren't limited to the Mitchell family tragedy. They pointed to a disturbing pattern of disappearances along the same stretch of highway. One article described a trucker's account of strange activity at an abandoned farm near the Nebraska-Colorado border. Another reported on a private investigator who had been probing the Mitchell case only to vanish himself days later. Beneath the clippings, Sarah found a hand-drawn map marked with cryptic notes, diverging from the interstate into back roads that led to isolated farmsteads and weathered barns. Photographs followed, family snapshots she had never seen of her parents and Emma, their smiles haunting in light of what came after, and darker images, grainy pictures of desolate rural properties, unfamiliar vehicles parked where they didn't belong, and faces crudely circled in red ink as though flagged as threats. Piece by piece, it became clear that Eleanor had never stopped searching, never stopped fighting for answers. But a letter, dated 6 months after the disappearance, revealed the terrifying reason she had hidden her investigation. A lawyer warned her that she was obstructing a federal case that continued digging could have serious consequences, not only for her, but for young Sarah as well. The threat was unmistakable. Someone powerful wanted the Mitchell mystery buried, and they would go to any length to keep it that way. But Sarah was no longer the frightened child her grandmother had once protected. She was a grown woman, determined and resourceful, with far less to lose and far more to uncover. As evening shadows lengthened across Cedar Falls, she combed through every page, every note, until a chilling truth began to emerge. Her family hadn't simply vanished. They had been deliberately silenced, victims of a cover-up orchestrated by forces with influence far beyond the county lines. That night, driven by both fear and resolve, Sarah dialed the county sheriff's office, her voice steady as she declared, "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I have new evidence about a missing persons case from 1992. I think it's time to reopen the investigation into the disappearance of the Mitchell family." The dispatcher's pause was brief but heavy before she replied, "Ma'am, I'll transfer you to Detective Rodriguez. She's been waiting for your call for a very long time." A chill ran through Sarah as she realized her next step had been anticipated, maybe even orchestrated, and the haunting question that remained was, who exactly had been waiting, and why? The conspiracy Sarah's grandmother had uncovered was not some relic of the past. It was alive, still thriving in the shadows, and Sarah had just stepped directly into its center. Within an hour of her call, Detective Maria Rodriguez arrived at the old Victorian house, her presence softened by kind eyes and a calm voice that immediately steadied Sarah's racing heart. But Rodriguez was not alone. 2 federal agents accompanied her, silent men with hard expressions, whose credentials identified them as part of a task force Sarah had never heard of. Their silence was both a comfort and a warning, reassuring in its professionalism, yet unsettling in the reminder that something dangerous was unfolding before her. Seated around the same worn kitchen table where her grandmother had once told stories and baked bread, Rodriguez leaned in and spoke gently but firmly. "Sarah, what you've discovered tonight reaches far beyond your family's tragedy. Your grandmother was right to be cautious, and you're right to be afraid. But you're also right to want the truth, and I believe we can finally uncover it." As Sarah listened, Rodriguez revealed that she had been quietly investigating the Mitchell disappearance for 5 years, ever since transferring from the Denver Police Department to Cedar Falls. What had seemed like a singular mystery was actually part of a much larger web. Along Interstate 80, families and individuals had been vanishing for decades, always near rest stops and truck stops where surveillance was scarce and help was far away. The Mitchell family, Rodriguez explained, had not been chosen at random. David Mitchell, Sarah's father, had been a journalist following leads of corruption in the trucking industry. He had uncovered evidence that certain trucking companies were serving as fronts for a human trafficking network, moving people across state lines under the guise of legitimate commerce. Rebecca Mitchell, Sarah's mother, had been digging into disturbing irregularities in the foster care system, children vanishing from records, placements that couldn't be accounted for. Together, their work had threatened to expose powerful people profiting from suffering. That was why they disappeared. The realization struck Sarah with crushing force. Her parents hadn't been victims of chance, but martyrs to the truth, silenced because they dared to confront evil. Rodriguez spread out maps and photographs across the table. Red circles marked stretches of highway where disappearances clustered, and properties hidden in the Colorado Rockies that had been tied to shell companies linked to the network. Many were abandoned now, but their purpose was clear: temporary facilities where victims were held until they were moved, sold, or worse. Sarah's throat tightened as she imagined her parents and sister trapped in such a place, their fates uncertain, killed, perhaps lost forever in chains. The uncertainty gnawed at her more viciously than death itself, because hope could be a crueler burden than grief. Finally, one of the silent agents, who introduced himself only as Thompson, broke his silence. His voice was steady but grave. "Ms. Mitchell, I need you to understand that reopening this case puts you in serious danger. The people who did this may no longer be trafficking, but they still have everything to lose if these crimes come to light. They've killed before to protect their secrets, and they will do it again." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as she shot him a warning look, then turned back to Sarah with quiet resolve. "That's why we've waited for you to come forward on your own. Because this fight, it was always meant to begin with you. They needed someone who could not be dismissed, someone whose voice carried both legitimacy and pain. And Sarah Mitchell was that person. For 30 years her grandmother had borne the crushing weight of silence, shielding Sarah from the truth until she was strong enough to face it. Now, staring at the federal agents seated around her grandmother's kitchen table, Sarah felt the enormity of that sacrifice settle over her. Eleanor hadn't just kept secrets, she had surrendered her own peace of mind to give Sarah the chance at a life untainted by fear. But that protection was gone, and the choice was now Sarah's alone. Retreat into safety or fight for justice, no matter the cost. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Rodriguez's eyes met hers with both gravity and hope. "We follow the evidence wherever it leads. We've built a case for years, but we've been missing someone who can speak for the victims, who can bring humanity to what others want, reduced to statistics. With your permission, we'll examine everything in that box, and together, we'll retrace your parents' steps." Sarah looked around the kitchen, remembering the countless mornings when her grandmother had stirred coffee at that same table, gently dodging questions about her parents with a smile that now made sense, not avoidance, but love in its most protective form. But Sarah was no longer the child who needed shielding. She was a woman who deserved the truth, and could stand as a voice for families still waiting for answers. "Where do we start?" she asked, and with that, she stepped into her family's unfinished fight. The next morning transformed the quiet Victorian home into an impromptu command center. Forensic specialists catalogued every scrap from the metal box, scanning documents and cross-referencing them with a vast database of unsolved disappearances spanning states and decades. Watching strangers in gloves handle the fragile legacy of her grandmother's secret work, Sarah felt both relief that the burden was no longer hers, alone, and unease at what they might uncover. Agent Thompson was gone, replaced by Agent Sarah Kim, a sharp-minded investigator whose specialty was organized crime, cold cases. She wasted no time explaining that internal corruption was still a threat. There were whispers that certain officials remained tied to the trafficking network, and leaks could cost lives. "Your grandmother was remarkably thorough," Kim noted, studying the crude hand-drawn map. "These notations line up with properties we've flagged separately. She spotted patterns even our systems missed, because she was seeing it as a mother and grandmother, not just data." Rodriguez unfurled a timeline she had built using Eleanor's notes, combined with the task force's files. Piece by piece, David and Rebecca Mitchell's final weeks came into focus. David hadn't merely stumbled upon industry corruption, he had been zeroing in on Mountain States Transport, a company with federal contracts to haul cargo across the western United States. To the outside world, they were legitimate haulers of steel, grain, and lumber. But beneath that cover, they were moving people, children who had aged out of foster care, immigrants who lacked papers or family to look for them, teenagers running from broken homes who thought they were getting a ride to safety, all swallowed into a system designed to make them vanish forever. Sarah leaned over the timeline, her eyes tracing the careful notes her grandmother had preserved. The pieces fit together with chilling precision. Her father had arranged a secret meeting in Denver with a whistleblower from Mountain States Transport, someone brave enough to expose the trafficking operation from the inside. That meeting explained their journey west through Nebraska, but it was a meeting they never reached. "They were intercepted," Rodriguez said grimly. "Someone knew about the rendezvous and stopped them before they crossed the state line." The room went quiet as the question hung in the air: who leaked the plan? Was it David's own newspaper, the whistleblower, or someone much higher up the chain? Agent Kim slid a folder across the table, filled with surveillance photos taken near the Nebraska rest stop where the Mitchell car was abandoned. The shots were grainy, blurred by distance, but among the parked vehicles was one that froze Sarah's breath: a Mountain States transport truck, conspicuously out of place on a route it should never have been traveling. For years, the task force had tried to identify the people in the photographs, but the hats, sunglasses, and poor image quality had left them faceless shadows. Sarah studied the images carefully, her stomach twisting as she searched for anything recognizable. And then she saw the silhouette of a woman in her 30s, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her stance somehow unsettlingly familiar. "Can you enhance this section?" she asked, pointing with trembling fingers. Kim worked swiftly, feeding the image through software until the blurred face sharpened just enough to reveal features Sarah hadn't seen in decades. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "That's Janet Carver," she whispered. She was my guidance counselor. After my family disappeared, she helped me when I first came to live with my grandmother. The air in the kitchen grew heavy as Rodriguez and Kim exchanged a knowing glance, the kind that only investigators of dark crimes shared. "You're certain?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah nodded, though the ground beneath her felt like it was tilting. Janet had been kind, gentle, a safe harbor for a grieving child. She had listened to Sarah's tears, comforted her during sleepless days, and helped her learn to live without her parents. The possibility that she hadn't been a guardian angel at all, but an operative planted to watch her, to make sure a traumatized little girl didn't recall something dangerous made by rise in Sarah's throat. Memories of conversations replayed in her mind. Janet reassuring her, Janet asking what she remembered about that last road trip, Janet always nudging her to focus forward, not back. The betrayal struck like a second death, almost as cruel as the first. If Janet Carver was there, Kim said firmly, phone already in hand, she could be the missing link. She may have monitored you to ensure you stayed quiet. She could lead us straight to the network. Sarah's stomach twisted as she considered how many tears she had shed in front of a woman who may have known exactly why her family never came home. Rodriguez placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I know this feels unbearable, Sarah, but this connection could be the breakthrough we've needed for decades. Janet Carver may be the key to bringing the entire operation down." For the next several hours, the house became a hive of tense energy as the task force pieced together Janet Carver's life. She had left the elementary school suddenly in 1995, only 3 years after Sarah's family disappeared. From that point on, her trail grew faint, her movements carefully obscured as though someone had wanted her to vanish. From official records, just as the Mitchells had, Janet Carver's employment records painted a chilling picture: short-term stints at schools and social service agencies across multiple states, always timed suspiciously around communities that had suffered tragedies or unexplained disappearances. She was a cleaner, Kim explained, her tone sharp with professional disgust. Her role was to monitor survivors, to make sure they never remembered too much, never pieced together enough to become a threat. The thought that Janet had likely counseled dozens of children, just like her children, whose families had been erased by the same network, made Sarah's stomach turn, but it also ignited something fierce inside her. For the first time, she understood that her story wasn't unique, and that knowledge gave her a grim sense of purpose. Rodriguez overlaid Janet's job history onto a map of disappearances, and the alignment was undeniable. Wherever families vanished, Janet surfaced in the aftermath, embedding herself into the lives of the survivors, the perfect mole hiding in plain sight. Yet, despite decades of movement, Janet's trail had finally gone cold in Missoula, Montana, where she had lived for the past 8 years, working openly as a trauma counselor, a cruel irony that made Sarah's hands clench into fists. "I want to confront her," Sarah said, her voice low but resolute. Kim immediately protested. "That's reckless. If she catches wind of our investigation, she'll vanish again, and this time we may never find her." But Rodriguez leaned back, her expression measured. Before her guard could drop, "Someone like Janet thinks she's safe, that the past is buried. Seeing you again might rattle her into revealing more than she intends." And so a plan was set. Sarah would go undercover as a client seeking help with unresolved childhood trauma. Janet's office specialized in cases just like hers, so the request would raise no suspicion. She would be wired for sound, with agents staged nearby to intervene if things escalated. "Remember," Rodriguez warned as they prepared for the trip, "women like Janet survive because they've mastered the art of self-deception. She may believe she was just following orders, or even convince herself she was helping in some twisted way. Don't expect a clean confession. Expect manipulation." During the flight to Montana, Sarah pored over every file the task force had assembled. Janet's early involvement suggested she may have once been a victim herself, later recruited to police the silence of others. Rising through the ranks, she had become too valuable to discard. Intelligent, cautious, and ruthless. Facing her would be like walking into the lion's den. Missoula itself felt deceptively tranquil, a picturesque town cradled by mountains, its Victorian houses and leafy streets offering the illusion of safety. Janet's practice was in one such house, its interior designed to soothe: soft lighting, pastel walls, furniture that invited the broken to sit and unburden themselves. And then, Sarah saw her. 32 years had passed, but the recognition was instant. Janet's once dark hair had silvered, her face mapped by age, but her voice, gentle, melodic, deceptively kind, was unchanged. The same voice that had comforted a 6-year-old orphan, now welcoming her again with a smile that made Sarah's blood run cold. The sound of Janet's voice was like a knife twisted in Sarah's memory, once the source of comfort and healing, now tainted with the knowledge that every word had been laced with betrayal. "Sarah," Janet said with disarming warmth, as if nothing had changed, "I'm so glad you reached out. I know this couldn't have been easy." Sarah followed her into the office, her every sense heightened by the weight of the recording device, hidden beneath her jacket, and the knowledge that federal agents waited just beyond the walls. The space was carefully curated for lighting, chairs angled for intimacy, a box of tissues within easy reach. Sitting across from the woman who had once dried her childhood tears, Sarah forced her voice to steady. "I've been struggling with some childhood memories," she began, sticking to the script she had rehearsed. "There are gaps in what I remember, things that don't make sense. I want to understand better." Janet gave a practiced nod, her expression soft with clinical empathy. "That's common. The mind often shields us from trauma, protecting us until we're ready to face it." Her pen hovered over her pad. "What are you hoping to remember?" Sarah drew in a breath. "I want to understand what really happened to my family when I was 6. My parents and sister disappeared on a road trip in 1992. I was told they just vanished, but I don't believe that anymore." For the briefest heartbeat, something flickered in Janet's eyes. Recognition, panic, but it vanished behind her professional mask. "That must have been incredibly traumatic," she said evenly, though her grip on the pen betrayed tension. "It's natural to keep searching for meaning." Sarah leaned in, pressing harder. "I found documents my grandmother hid, evidence that my family wasn't random, that they were targeted because of what my father was investigating." This time Janet's composure faltered. Her hand twitched, her body shifted, the pen almost snapped under her tightening grip. "That sounds like a very difficult discovery," she replied, her voice still level, but tinged with strain. "Grief can make us see connections that aren't really there." Sarah locked eyes with her. "But what if they are real? What if people who destroyed families like mine are still alive, living ordinary lives, while their victims are still waiting for justice?" The silence that followed stretched like a drawn bowstring, taut and dangerous. Finally, Janet set her pen down, folding her hands slowly. When she spoke again, her tone was stripped of kindness, replaced with something edged and deliberate. "Sarah," she said softly, "be very careful about the path you're walking. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the mystery." The words landed like a threat, thinly veiled, yet undeniable. Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears, but she forced her face to remain calm, her voice steady. "Are you speaking from professional experience?" she asked, her words sharp as glass. "Or personal experience?" Janet rose abruptly, crossing to the window, her back rigid as she stared out at the quiet street. When she turned, the mask of the nurturing counselor was gone, replaced by something far more chilling. The warmth in her eyes had vanished, replaced with the cold calculation of someone who had spent a lifetime burying secrets and was willing to do anything to keep them hidden. "I think this session is over," Janet said abruptly, her tone stripped of warmth. "I'm not the right therapist for your needs." But Sarah refused to move. She could feel the truth pressing against the walls of this room, and she wasn't about to walk away now. "I remember you, Janet," she said, her voice steady. "From Cedar Falls Elementary. You helped me after my family disappeared. What are the odds that, 32 years later, I'd randomly choose you as my therapist?" The color drained from Janet's face, her mask slipping as decades of lies suddenly seemed too heavy to hold. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," she whispered. "You don't understand the kind of people involved, or what they're capable of. Your grandmother kept you safe by keeping you ignorant. Don't throw that away." Sarah rose to her feet, her voice firm. "My grandmother is gone, and I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know what happened. I will not stop until I do." Janet's eyes searched Sarah's face, and something shifted in her expression, resignation, or perhaps the faint relief of no longer carrying her burden alone. Then her voice cracked. "They killed them," she admitted, the words trembling into the silence. "Your parents and your sister. They killed them because your father found out about the children, what we were doing to them. He was going to expose everything, and they couldn't let that happen." The confession hit Sarah like a physical blow. The air sucked from her lungs. For over 3 decades, she had lived with uncertainty, clinging to fading hope. Now the answer was here. Her family had been executed to protect a monstrous secret. Tears blurred her vision as she forced out the question, "Where?" Janet lowered herself heavily into her chair, her voice brittle with age. "There was a facility in the Colorado mountains, hidden where no one would think to look. That's where they took families who got too close. That's where yours died." The words fell like stones, final and devastating, yet carrying with them the strange weight of closure. Sarah's tears flowed freely, grief and relief tangled into something sharp and unyielding. "Why?" she demanded. "Why did you help them? Why watch me mourn when you knew the truth?" Janet was silent for a long moment, her shoulders sagging as if the fight had left her. "Because I was a coward," she whispered at last. "Because I feared them more than I hated myself. By the time I realized how wrong it all was, I was too deep to get out. I tried, in small ways, to protect you. I made sure you went to your grandmother, that you had stability. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do." Sarah's emotions churned fury at Janet's complicity, but also a twisted gratitude for the stability she had once provided. "Is the facility still there?" she asked, wiping her eyes. Janet shook her head. "It was shut down years ago. When the heat got too close, the network moved overseas, where the shadows are deeper and the rules weaker. Those who ran it believe they're safe now." Sarah's grief hardened into resolve. "They're not safe anymore. I'll make sure." "They pay." For a fleeting moment, Janet's tired eyes softened with admiration. "You look just like your mother when you say that," she murmured. "Rebecca had that same fire. It's what got her killed, but it's what made her a hero." For the first time since stepping into this office, Sarah felt a smile break. Through her tears, her mother had been a fighter, a woman who stood against evil no matter the cost. And now, it was Sarah's turn to finish the battle. She leaned forward, her voice edged with determination. "Then give me the details. Names, locations, anything," Sarah pressed, her voice firm but calm. "The FBI is on this now, and they'll need everything you can give." For a moment, Janet's eyes widened with suspicion. "The FBI? How did you?" Then her gaze sharpened with sudden clarity. "You're wearing a wire, aren't you? This was a setup all along." Sarah didn't flinch. She nodded, no longer caring to hide it. "There's a task force that's been chasing this network for years. They've been waiting for someone like me to come forward, someone who could force the truth into the open." Janet gave a bitter laugh and started to rise. "Then you've got what you came for. We're done." But Sarah raised her hand. "No, we're not. You've lived with this guilt for decades. This is your chance to finally make it right, to give justice to all the families who were destroyed. Don't waste it." Janet froze, the fight draining from her, and sank back into her chair. Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. Most of them are dead or gone. The few who are still alive, too much power, too many friends in high places. They'll never face a courtroom." "That's not your problem," Sarah countered, her tone unwavering. "Let us worry about that. Right now, I just need the truth. Start with the facility in Colorado, where it was. Who ran it? What happened inside?" For a long moment, Janet seemed trapped between silence and confession, but at last she spoke, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "It was called Mountain View Ranch, about 40 miles west of Denver, tucked in a hidden valley. From the outside, it looked like a rehab center for troubled kids, but the children who went in never came out." The words sent a shiver through Sarah, each syllable painting the horror her family must have faced. Yet beneath the rising tide of grief, she felt a grim satisfaction. This was the proof, the beginning of the end for those who had stolen so many lives. Over the next 2 hours, Janet laid bare the operation structure, the front companies, the corrupt officials who kept it running, the methods they used to traffic children and families without a trace. By the time the session ended, Sarah carried not just her family's truth, but a roadmap for dismantling an empire of cruelty that had thrived in the shadows for more than 30 years. When she finally stepped out of Janet's office into the cool Montana air, she was no longer just a victim searching for closures. She was a witness carrying the power to shatter the silence. The years that followed were grueling. The task force's investigation stretched across countries, uncovering a lattice of corruption that implicated business leaders, politicians, and criminals alike. Dozens of arrests would follow, culminating in one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in American history. And yet for Sarah, The most meaningful moment came not in a courtroom but on a quiet spring morning in 2026 in the Colorado mountains. Near the place where her family's lives had been stolen, a small memorial service was held. With trembling hands, she placed flowers on the ground, finally able to whisper goodbye. Their story had not ended in silence. It had ended in truth and in justice. The Mountain View Ranch was long gone, its buildings erased from the Colorado mountainside, as though they had never existed, but its ghosts remained. When the task force uncovered the hidden graves in the valley, Sarah finally had a place to mourn. Standing at the simple marker bearing the names Rebecca, David, and Emma Mitchell, she laid flowers gently against the stone and let the weight of 32 years wash over her. She thought of Eleanor, her grandmother who had carried the truth in silence for decades, shielding Sarah at the cost of her own peace. She thought of Janet Carver, now serving a reduced sentence after trading her testimony for mercy, a woman who had lived as both betrayer and reluctant protector. And she thought of the countless other families shattered by the network, some of whom would at last receive the closure they had been denied for so long. The old metal box hidden beneath the attic floorboards had carried more than brittle photographs and yellowed documents. It had carried the seeds of justice, waiting for the right moment to be planted. Opening it had stripped Sarah of the comfort of ignorance, but had given her something far more enduring, the knowledge that her parents and sister had died, not in vain, but because they had dared to fight for what was right. As the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, Sarah whispered a promise over the grave, her voice steady despite the tears. She would continue their fight. She would use her voice, her story, and her pain to shine light into the same darkness that had stolen her family. The Mitchells' disappearance in 1992 had been a tragedy that silenced one household, but their rediscovery in 2024 had become a victory that would protect countless others. The box was empty now, its secret spoken, its purpose fulfilled. Yet the legacy it had preserved, the story of a family who died for truth, would live on in Sarah's resolve. Their sacrifice would have meaning, and their story would never again be forgotten.